So I recorded this video a day before the Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg offer sheets, but it does not change anything about this video, so carry on. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about a month away till NHL training camps start back up, and still, even today, we have so many star RFAs that have yet to sign. The RFA list is pretty extensive, featuring Lucas Raymond, Seth, Jarvis, Thomas Harley, Moritz, Seider, Perfetti, Matty, Beniers, Jeremy Swayman, and a lot more. So today we're going to be looking at which players we should be worrying about, which players might be close to getting a contract done, who could be offer sheet eligible, and we're just looking at all of the big-time RFAs that have still yet to sign, presented by BetUS. Now today, let's start with two high-profile RFAs that are actually on the same team, still yet to be signed, and two incredibly important pieces for the Detroit Red Wings in both Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond. The crazy thing is that one of these guys being unsigned would still be a little bit of a concern, but both of them being unsigned raises some pretty big red flags. We know that Detroit has been very active over these last couple of off seasons, making big moves, big signings, and we see Seider and Raymond, two core pieces of that former rebuild, still not having a contract. It actually got to a point where Red Wings head coach Derek Lalonde was actually asked about it, saying that both are eligible to be signed to 8-year term contracts, but either or both may prefer a shorter term deal that'll allow them to renegotiate in a few years when the salary cap has gone up, potentially allowing for an even fatter deal. Then in this Hockey Writers article, they go on to say that Seider could likely command around $9 to $10 million annually, Raymond around the $7.75 million range as well. Now let's just say for a second that Seider and Raymond's agents just absolutely go off and they get the max $10 million and $7.5 million. It will put them right on the edge of cap space right now at $7.6 million, and they still have to sign Jonathan Bergeron. But this makes a lot of sense that both of these players are looking for shorter term deals, especially in Moritz Seider's case. I think that is the best move from him. He hasn't had the strongest last couple of years, mostly because of the deployment and how many minutes he's been having to eat. But I think as Detroit gets a little bit better around him, as some of those other defensive prospects come into the fold, Seider's responsibilities will hopefully not be as strained, and in a couple of years you can see even better production, even better overall play from him, and that's probably what Seider wants to do. Play better in the future, get a better contract, and get as much money as possible. I mean, that's the goal here from all these players. The thing is, I'm not really too worried about Lucas Raymond specifically getting signed. I just have a hunch there, but also I think because of the lower AAV that Raymond will likely command, I think it'll be a less complicated deal to sign in the end. In Seider's case, though, I think with how much more of a high-profile D he is, with how much potential there is as well, and how much his deployment has kind of been all over the place and how that's kind of affected his numbers, the negotiations, I'm sure, have been extremely complicated, especially if he wants a shorter-term deal there, and especially considering Detroit has other players to sign. Getting Seider for as low as possible is the real goal here, especially with how many other free agents they've signed already. Cap space is not unlimited here for Detroit, and they have to be really careful with every deal they sign, which is exactly why these two high-profile guys are still off the block. But this is going to be a situation to watch out for. I think for Detroit to make the playoffs, to have a successful season, they have to start out the gate really successful, and I think that starts by having Raymond, Seider there for training camps to really get the momentum going, especially in Raymond's case, how valuable he is offensively. 30-plus goals last year, 72 points. This is somebody you need, and Seider especially as well is a must. Now on that note, Detroit, we're going to take a second here to talk about today's sponsor in BetUS, and if you guys don't know already, BetUS is the place to be, especially with the NHL season starting here. You can make predictions on everything here coming up, on the NHL awards, on the divisional race, on the Stanley Cup winners. If you're feeling good about Detroit as a Detroit fan, they have plus 1100 to win the division in the Atlantic this next year, but if you're feeling against them, you could go for somebody else in that division as well. The odds are pretty interesting there with Florida, with Toronto, Boston up there. Maybe there's a surprise team that's in the mix, but you can go for anything and everything. If you're feeling good about Detroit, though, putting $5 down, win 55 will be one heck of a win there. But if you want to sign up to BetUS, you get the best payouts, the best customer service, and when you sign up, you'll get an 125% bonus on your first deposits up to $2,000. Right now is the best time to get started with BetUS, and thank you so much, BetUS, for sponsoring today's video. Next, we go on to another big-time RFA that is yet to sign in Seth Jarvis with the Carolina Hurricanes. He is a fascinating one. You guys know I've been a big fan of him for a long time, back in his Portland Winterhawks days. He's somebody, though, that had a huge breakout year this last season, getting 33 goals, 67 points, and in the playoffs also doing pretty well, too. 5 goals, 9 points in 11 games. A huge coming out party for him. But as we know, with any contender, Carolina is a team heavily dealing with cap space every single day, and they're a team that had a lot of roster turnover this last offseason, including a lot of new players and all players that left. But instead of Jarvis's case, he's really the last piece to the puzzle. Carolina is currently sitting with around $8.275 million in cap space, and on the surface level, it would seem pretty easy. I think Seth Jarvis would probably be around that range, around $8 million, but I think there is the chance that he could be commanding more, and also the chance that Carolina just wants as much cap space as possible, especially for the deadline this next year. And in this article from Clutch Points, we got a good recap of what the situation is around Jarvis, saying that according to Canes Corner podcast host Adam Gold, the understanding is that the two sides are actively engaged in contract talks, and both sides want the same thing. They both want an 8-year deal. The Hurricanes inserted a report recently, where we are now at a sticking point is where the AAV number will ultimately be at. My understanding right now is that the number is north of 8. Now they go on to say there's real momentum between Carolina and Jarvis as well, and that the projected contract would likely be around the $7.75 million range, which I think would be perfectly fair. Even if it's around 8, honestly, I think that's fair too, especially long term with the salary cap going up, with how important he is to that offense, with how much he has improved. I don't see him being a 100-point player, but I see Jarvis being an instrumental part of that offense and bringing energy that Carolina really needs, especially on that top 6. They need more offense, they need more punch, and Jarvis has been able to bring that. I honestly wouldn't be too scared about Jarvis getting a deal done, because I think up to this point, the main reason why he hasn't been signed is because Carolina's just had a lot to deal with on the roster, and they just recently signed Marty Necas to his contract extension, which leaves Seth Jarvis as the next man in line. I think we will see a deal happen before training camp. At least that's the hope, because I want to see him go off for another great year. Now going into a situation I'm a lot more worried about, this time with Matty Beniers and the Seattle Kraken. Now when we look at just the player itself, I don't think it should be much of a problem. He has been a great player for Seattle, and even though this last year was a little bit of decline in consistency, I think we'll see him back to a solid level this next year, at least if he was fully signed. The problem though for me is that Seattle had a pretty massive offseason. They signed Chandler Stevenson to a $6.25 million contract all the way past 2030, and you also got the big Brandon Montour contract too at $7.14 million. Now for Seattle to sign Matty Beniers, they have just $5.5 million in cap space to work with. This isn't one of those situations with the Detroit duo or even Jarvis where I think they could absolutely have the cap space even right now to make the deal work. Right now for Seattle, they'd be in the red if they sign Beniers to anything but a steal of a contract. And this is the problem for me, is that coming into this offseason, I thought Beniers was primed for this long-term extension with Seattle to become the future captain for this Kraken team. Not yet, but in the future, and be a mainstay for this franchise. But with how Seattle positioned themselves in free agency, with the big guys they went after, it made the Beniers contract negotiations so much more impossible. If that cap hit does not change at all, I think the only real way to sign Beniers is to sign him to a 1-year deal and just pay him afterwards, because even at $5.5 million, that is a steal even now, I think, for what Beniers can bring. Even if this last year wasn't the greatest for him, I think, again, he will be rebounding here soon. But it just feels like Seattle kind of hitched their wagon too soon. And right now with Beniers, they're kind of in a weird spot where they can't really even sign him. I do think they'll be able to figure out something eventually, but I could absolutely see the situation being something where he goes into training camp without a contract, and we just kind of have to speculate about what happens next. There might be some moving around that Seattle has to make happen here, but they better do it soon, because Beniers is too important to have unsigned. And just to make things a little bit more interesting, yes, Matty Beniers is offer sheet eligible, and I'm just saying, if I wanted to put a chokehold on Seattle, things could get interesting here. Now, another big one to look out for, this time on the defensive side of things, comes from my favorite team in the Dallas Stars and Thomas Harley. Now, this is another player that I think is really due for a shorter term deal. In Harley's case, the Stars just do not have the cap space, I think, to give him that long-term deal that he would really want. Now, it's weird because on cap wages, they say the Stars have about $4.69 million in cap space, while on Puckpedia, they say the Stars have around 6.24. If Puckpedia is correct and it's around 6.24, then I don't think it'll be too much of a problem, at least on a shorter term deal. I think that's more than enough to sign Harley to a 1 or 2 year contract. But if it's more like the cap wages contract, then I think that could be a little bit of a problem. Still, though, I think Harley will eventually get signed, but kind of like Carolina's situation, Dallas had a lot of contracts to go after, a lot of changes on the defense, and Harley is really the last domino. I think he is due for a prominent raise, though. He is somebody that has really done well over the last year and a half for really proving himself at the NHL level. This last year getting 47 points in 79 games, and in the playoffs having a pretty great role. Should have gotten more points than he did, honestly. He was absolutely incredible. I think in Harley's case, with the puck moving ability he has, the skating, there's so much to like there offensively, and I think the Stars need more of that on that defense, and we'll see where it ends up going. I think it's a little bit of an issue with how they sign their defense and players like Dumba and Labushkin, but I've already been mad about that enough, and I'm just gonna let it go. Now, the next one I want to talk about here is Dawson Mercer with the New Jersey Devils. This one is going to be a fascinating one, really has been for a while. He, to me, has been a fun player to watch in the NHL in his time, but a pretty inconsistent one. You can see in his first NHL season, 42 points. Last year, 56 points, 27 goals. This year took a little bit of a step back, but was better in the second half, getting 20 goals, 33 points. I think we're going to see about back in that 50 range this next year, at least if he is fully signed. But of course, we know that New Jersey, another team that wanted to make as many changes as possible. They did, and they went after a lot of players in that defense, changing up that goaltending in Jacob Markstrom, which leaves very little room for Mercer, especially long term. Now, it's definitely not impossible. Right now, New Jersey has about $5.7 million in cap space after all the moves they made. So I think Mercer most likely will kind of be in the Harley range, where he signs a shorter term 2-3-year deal and just goes in that mid range around $5 million or so. I could absolutely see something like that. In Mercer's case, I think the momentum is also kind of not on his side, considering his lackluster 2024 and New Jersey making a lot of changes. I don't think they need Mercer to succeed, but I think having him there, having him have another successful season would certainly help that top six. But they do need to start being careful here with their younger players. You got Mercer as an RFA, but you also got Luke Hughes as an RFA coming up, and Simon Nemec as well as an RFA in a couple of seasons as well. So they're going to start getting some paydays there, and they're going to have to worry about those contracts too. So they can't mess around here and bow down to Mercer's demands. Now, going on to probably the last high-profile forward that's an RFA this year in Cole Perfetti with the Winnipeg Jets. This one, to me, should have been one of the more simple ones, especially considering the lack of momentum in Perfetti's case. He's somebody that will likely command maybe $3-4 million with an RFA extension, probably only a couple-year deal. I think in Perfetti's case, again, there's not a lot of momentum there, and Winnipeg has a good amount of cap space, around $5 to $6 million. So it's not like they have nothing to give Perfetti. This should get done, again, hopefully. I think Perfetti needs to have a full training camp, needs to have a fully accustomed year under his belt, because he is somebody that needs to have a big 2025. So I'm just hoping that a deal gets done soon. It's sad that he's still an RFA up to this point. Now we go on to the last RFA I want to talk about here, but one of the most high profile ones, especially on the goaltending side. We got Jeremy Swayman here of the Boston Bruins. Now this situation is definitely one of the most confusing RFA situations out there, considering the Bruins went out and traded Linus Ullmark, the real competition to Jeremy Swayman's starting net, and they traded him to Ottawa, gave Swayman all the opportunity to be the full-time starter, but they haven't signed him to a contract yet. And it's August. I think it's a very bold move to trade one of the best goalies over the past few years in Linus Ullmark, giving Swayman the starting role, which I think is definitely deserved, but to not even have Swayman under contract when you trade away Linus Ullmark, to me, it's a little bit of a recipe for disaster, and still in August, we haven't seen him signed, and, well, you haven't seen too much momentum. Now we go into this Hockey Writers article saying that Bruins starting to feel pressure with Swayman's contract, talking about the pressure to secure him to a long-term deal. The netminder has proven to be worth a significant raise, but one has to wonder if the Bruins have started to realize that trading Ullmark before having the Swayman deal locked in was a mistake. Now it's up to Don Sweeney to finalize the agreement, and it doesn't sound like Swayman is in a big hurry to do so. Perhaps happy enough to wait until the big offer comes rolling in. The Bruins have around $8.6 million in cap space, and they can't make any other additions until Swayman's situation is handled. And I got to agree here, it feels very short-sighted to make that Ullmark deal, not even having any progress really on Swayman's contract, and it feels like they're still at the starting point here in negotiations. And especially considering how important Swayman has been to the Bruins' success, it feels like this contract would have been signed a year ago. He's 25, right in the prime of his career, and you can see what he's been able to do with the Bruins. A .916 save percentage, a .933 save percentage in the playoffs this last year. He has been their go-to guy, has surpassed Linus Ullmark, which has been pretty hard to do considering how good he's been over the past few seasons. Swayman has proved himself to be the guy, yet it's kind of dumbfounding me how we haven't seen a contract happen yet. And as has been said, the Bruins aren't really hurting too much for cap space, at least not yet. They have $8.5 million to work with, which on paper feels more than enough to make a Swayman contract work. Even in the shorter term where Swayman is probably asking for more AAV up front, I feel like 8.5 could pretty easily make that happen. I think Swayman could probably reasonably get around $6.5–7 million in a shorter term deal, but it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here, especially with the Bruins not really having much else. I mean, they got Korpisalo, I guess, but do you want Korpisalo as your starter? I don't think that worked out too well for the Ottawa Senators, who traded him to you. But we'll see what happens. I think for a lot of those people out there finally rooting for the Bruins to have a horrible season, really, Swayman being unsigned might be the biggest reason that ends up happening. If he goes into the season unsigned and the Bruins have to ride maybe Korpisalo and Bussy, I would assume, then that could be somewhat of an issue considering the lack of depth that is already there on that Bruins roster. And that could be something to watch out for the Bruins this next year. I do think it will end up getting done maybe later in training camp, but man, this is going to be interesting. The momentum is all on Swayman's side, and I don't doubt him whatsoever that he can ride this as long as he wants to get the most money possible, and I think he'll end up getting it done in the end. But I would love to hear your thoughts down below on all the RFAs we talked about here. Which ones you see getting signed, which ones you see maybe being a problem towards training camp and potentially into the NHL season. Let me know all your thoughts down below, and of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Share a video with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all the predictions and pick content right in one playlist. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a great hockey day, and sign up to BetUS if you guys haven't already. And I will see you in the next one, folks. Goodbye.